The stars stretched endlessly across the viewing screen of the Frontier Explorer, as Captain Jake Morrison leaned back in his command chair. The ship hummed with the familiar sound of faster-than-light engines, a technology humanity had only mastered 3 years ago. Jake ran his hand through his dark hair and smiled at the thought. 3 years, and already humans had established colonies on 12 different worlds. The galaxy was vast, and humanity was eager to explore every corner of it. Lisa Hayes, the chief engineer, walked onto the bridge carrying a datapad. Her blonde hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and her green eyes showed the exhaustion of another long shift in the engine room. She approached Jake's chair and handed him the device without saying a word. Jake took it and scanned the information quickly. Fuel efficiency was up by 4%, and the new modifications to the drive system were holding steady. He nodded his approval and handed the pad back to her. Greg Palmer sat at the navigation console, his fingers dancing across the holographic controls as he plotted their course to the next survey location. The young officer had a talent for finding the most efficient routes through space, saving the Frontier Explorer precious time and resources. He turned his head slightly and called out to Jake that they would reach the Kepler 442 system in approximately 6 hours. Jake acknowledged the information and told Greg to maintain current speed. The bridge fell into a comfortable silence. The crew had been together for 18 months and they had developed an easy rhythm. They trusted each other completely, which was essential when you were months away from the nearest human outpost. Jake looked around at his team and felt a surge of pride. These were good people, dedicated to pushing humanity's boundaries further into the unknown. Then the communication console lit up with an incoming transmission. Lieutenant Kevin Shaw, the communications officer, straightened in his seat and began working to decode the signal. His brown eyes narrowed in concentration as data streamed across his screen. After a moment, he looked up at Jake with confusion written across his face. The signal was not from any human source. It was coming from something else entirely. Jake felt his pulse quicken. First contact. Every spacefarer dreamed of this moment, and it was happening on his watch. He ordered Kevin to put the transmission through to the main screen. The image that appeared was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. The being on the screen had 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on its elongated head. Its skin was a deep purple color, and it wore what appeared to be formal robes covered in intricate symbols. The alien spoke, and the computer's translation software kicked in immediately. The voice that came through the speakers was surprisingly melodic, despite the strange words being translated. The being introduced itself as Ambassador Zixthar of the Galactic Council, representing 47 advanced civilizations spanning thousands of star systems. Jake listened carefully as the ambassador explained that humanity had been detected and monitored since achieving faster-than-light capability. The ambassador's message continued, with what he clearly believed was good news. Humanity was being invited to join the Galactic Council as a junior member species. This was presented as a great honor, a chance to learn from civilizations millions of years more advanced than Earth. However, as the ambassador outlined the terms of membership, Jake felt his enthusiasm drain away. Humanity would need to cease all unauthorized expansion immediately. All human colonies would need to register with the Council and accept Council law. Human ships would require Council permits to travel beyond designated zones. Military forces would need to be reduced to Council-approved levels. Cultural practices would need to align with Council standards. Lisa had moved to stand beside Jake's chair, and he could feel her tension. Greg had stopped his work at the navigation console entirely, turning to watch the screen with his mouth slightly open. Kevin was recording every word of the transmission, but his hands had frozen over his controls. The entire bridge crew understood what they were hearing. The Galactic Council was not offering partnership or friendship. They were offering subjugation dressed up in diplomatic language. When the transmission ended, Ambassador Zixthar waited expectantly for a response. The alien's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, and Jake realized this being truly expected humanity to be grateful for this opportunity. Jake took a deep breath and stood up from his command chair. He smoothed his uniform and walked closer to the screen. For a moment, he considered his words carefully. This response would echo across both human and alien space. It needed to be clear. Jake looked directly into the camera and spoke in a calm, firm voice. He thanked Ambassador Zixthar for making contact, and acknowledged the impressive scope of the Galactic Council. Then he delivered humanity's answer. Humanity appreciated the offer, but they would have to decline. Earth and her colonies would continue to govern themselves according to their own laws and principles. Humans would expand where they chose and maintain whatever military forces they deemed necessary for their own defense. Humanity was willing to establish trade relations and cultural exchanges, but only between equals, not as subordinates seeking permission for every action. The ambassador's reaction was immediate and visible. All four eyes widened simultaneously, and the alien leaned forward as if he had misheard. Zixthar asked Jake to repeat his response, clearly believing there had been a translation error. Jake repeated himself using even simpler language. The answer was no. Humanity would not be joining the Galactic Council under the terms presented. Ambassador Zixthar seemed genuinely baffled. He explained patiently, as one might explain something to a child, that all spacefaring species joined the Council. It was simply how things were done. The alternative was chaos and conflict. Surely humanity understood the benefits of being part of a stable galactic community. Jake listened politely and then explained that humanity had just spent the last 200 years fighting to free themselves from empires and tyrannies. They had finally achieved global unity and peace on their own terms. They were not interested in trading one set of distant rulers for another. The transmission ended abruptly. Ambassador Zixthar's image disappeared from the screen, leaving the bridge in silence. Lisa let out a breath she had been holding and looked at Jake with a mixture of admiration and concern. She asked quietly if he understood what he had just done. Jake nodded slowly. He had just told the most powerful political entity in the galaxy that humanity would go its own way. Greg turned back to his console and muttered that things were about to get interesting. Jake returned to his command chair and ordered Kevin to send a full report of the contact back to Earth Command immediately. The message would take weeks to reach home, but Command needed to know what had happened. He also ordered Lisa to begin a full diagnostic of all weapon systems and defensive capabilities. If the Galactic Council was used to everyone saying yes, they might not react well to humanity's refusal. The Frontier Explorer continued on its course toward Kepler 442, but the mood on the bridge had changed completely. First contact had happened, and humanity had drawn a line in the stars. Whatever came next, they would face it as free people, not as subjects begging for acceptance from ancient alien empires. 3 months had passed since Captain Jake Morrison had rejected the Galactic Council's demands, and the situation had grown increasingly tense. Ambassador Zixthar stood in the grand chamber of the Council headquarters, a massive structure orbiting a neutron star at the center of Council space. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, with representatives from 47 different species, arranged in circular tiers that rose hundreds of meters toward a domed ceiling that displayed real-time images of Council territories. Zixthar addressed the assembly, with barely concealed frustration in his melodic voice. He explained that humanity had not only refused membership, but had actively ignored every subsequent communication. More concerning was the fact that human colony ships continued to spread across star systems at an alarming rate. In just 3 months, they had established settlements in 18 new systems, moving faster than any species in recorded history. The humans acted as if the Council simply did not exist. High Chancellor Vormak, a towering being covered in crystalline structures that reflected light in rainbow patterns, listened from the highest tier. His species had founded the Council nearly 10,000 years ago, and in all that time not a single species had refused integration. The concept was so foreign that most Council members struggled to even comprehend it. Junior species always joined. It was the natural order of galactic civilization. Councillor Pyrus from the Merchant Alliance spoke next, his triple-jointed arms gesturing emphatically as he outlined the economic implications. Several fringe colonies and independent traders had begun approaching human settlements for trade agreements. The humans offered favorable terms without the heavy taxation that Council membership required. If this trend continued, the entire economic structure that had sustained the Council for millennia could begin to fracture. Military strategist Quendra, a reptilian being with dark green scales and sharp intelligence in her amber eyes, presented tactical assessments. Her analysis showed that human technology, while less advanced overall, displayed unusual creativity and adaptability. Their ships were not as fast or as large as Council vessels, but they incorporated redundant systems and modular designs that made them remarkably resilient. More troubling was the speed of their technological advancement. In just 3 years of space travel, they had made improvements that typically took other species decades to achieve. The debate in the council chamber grew heated. The Velcron representative demanded immediate military action to bring humanity into line. The Crystalline Collective suggested a technology blockade, preventing humans from accessing advanced materials needed for further expansion. The Hive Consensus, speaking through their collective voice, recommended a demonstration of overwhelming force to convince humans of the futility of resistance. After hours of argument, a decision was reached. The Fifth Fleet would be dispatched to human space under the command of Admiral Kraytok, with orders to enforce Council authority. Admiral Kraytok was a veteran commander from the Velcron Empire, a species known for their military precision and unwavering devotion to hierarchy. His flagship, the Endless Authority, was a massive dreadnought that had never been defeated in battle. The Fifth Fleet consisted of 42 warships, more than enough firepower to conquer most civilizations. Kraytok reviewed the mission parameters with confidence. He would arrive at a human colony, make a show of force, and accept their inevitable surrender. It would be a simple mission, routine even. The Fifth Fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Portland system, one of humanity's newer colonies. The planet below was still in early development, with a population of only 30,000 settlers. Admiral Kraytok ordered his ships into formation, a display meant to inspire awe and fear. He opened a communication channel to the colony and declared that they were now under Council jurisdiction. All human ships were to power down their weapons and prepare to receive Council administrators. Commander Danny Rogers sat in the control center of Sentinel Station, the orbital defense platform protecting New Portland. He was a stocky man with short brown hair and a calm demeanor that had served him well during his years in the Space Defense Force. Next to him, Lieutenant Amy Carter monitored the tactical displays while Commander Steve Bennett coordinated with the fighter squadrons positioned throughout the system. Danny listened to Admiral Kraytok's demands and felt his jaw tighten. The Council had come to his colony expecting submission, and he was about to disappoint them severely. Danny activated the communication system and responded with a message so simple it could not be misunderstood. The Council ships were in human territory without permission. They needed to turn around and leave immediately. Admiral Kraytok's response came quickly, and Danny could hear the insult in the alien commander's translated voice. Kraytok ordered his weapons officer to fire a warning shot across the colony's orbital path, a plasma bolt that would demonstrate Council firepower without causing damage. The moment the Council ship fired, everything changed. Danny had been waiting for any act of aggression, and now he had it. He gave the order that every defense commander in human space had been authorized to give. Defend the colony by any means necessary. Sentinel Station's main railgun fired first, a tungsten projectile accelerating to a significant fraction of light speed. It struck the Council ship that had fired the warning shot, punching through shields that had never been designed to stop kinetic weapons. The alien vessel shuddered and began venting atmosphere. Amy Carter's fingers flew across her console as she activated the hidden defense satellites that had been deployed throughout the system. These small, stealthy platforms had been invisible to Council sensors, designed specifically to avoid detection by more advanced civilizations. They opened fire simultaneously, launching missiles and directed energy beams at the Council fleet from multiple angles. The aliens had expected a defenseless colony. Instead, they found themselves in a carefully prepared kill zone. Steve Bennett coordinated the fighter launch from 3 concealed hangars built into nearby asteroids. Pilots like Lieutenant Jake Murphy and Captain Nina Cross launched in small, agile craft that had been painted with radar-absorbing coatings. The human fighters moved in ways that Council vessels could not match, using rapid acceleration and tight maneuvering to get inside the defensive perimeter of the larger alien ships. Their weapons might be less powerful, but at close range, they could target vulnerable systems with precision strikes. Admiral Kraytok watched in horror as his formation fell apart. 3 ships were already critically damaged, and the human attacks showed no sign of stopping. His shields were designed to deflect energy weapons, but these primitive kinetic projectiles simply punched through them. His point defense systems could not track the small human fighters that darted between his vessels like insects. For the first time in his long military career, Kratok gave an order he had never imagined giving. He commanded the Fifth Fleet to retreat. The Council ships turned and fled back toward the system's edge, leaving their damaged vessels behind. Danny Rogers did not pursue. His orders were to defend the colony, not to start an interstellar war. He watched the alien fleet jump to faster-than-light speed and disappear, then turned to his exhausted crew. Amy looked at him with wide eyes and asked what they had just done. Danny leaned back in his chair and gave her an honest answer. They had just shown the Galactic Council that humanity would not be pushed around. News of the battle spread through both human and Council space at the speed of light. On Earth, military leaders analyzed every detail of the engagement, looking for lessons and weaknesses. In the Council chambers, panic began to set in. A species, barely 3 years into space travel, had just defeated a Council fleet. Ambassador Zixthar stood before the assembly once again, and this time his voice carried genuine concern. Humanity had not just refused diplomacy, they had backed up that refusal with force, and now the Council faced a problem they had no experience solving. President Helen Foster stood before the Global Assembly in Geneva, looking out at the representatives from every nation on Earth. The massive chamber was filled to capacity, with delegates from nearly 200 countries waiting to hear her address. The news from New Portland had reached Earth 2 days ago, and the entire planet was holding its breath. Humanity had just fought its first battle against an alien civilization, and now everyone wanted to know what would come next. Helen took a deep breath and began speaking in a clear, steady voice. She explained that for thousands of years humanity had been divided. Nations had fought against nations, empires had conquered and enslaved, and countless people had died in wars over territory, resources, and ideology. It had taken humanity until the 22nd century to finally achieve global unity, and even that unity was still fragile in many ways. The formation of the Global Assembly had been humanity's greatest achievement, a government that respected the autonomy of individual nations while working together for the common good. Director Paul Griffin stepped forward to present the intelligence analysis his team had compiled on the Galactic Council. Paul was a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses and a sharp mind that had served in intelligence work for 30 years. He activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber, showing a 3-dimensional map of Council space. The structure was clear and deeply hierarchical. At the top were the founding species, civilizations that had started the Council 10,000 years ago. They held permanent seats and veto power over all major decisions. Below them were the senior member species, civilizations that had been part of the Council for at least 5,000 years. They had voting rights on most matters but could be overruled by the founders. Then came the junior members, species that had joined within the last 5,000 years. Paul explained that junior members had almost no real power. They could not vote on military matters, economic policy, or expansion rights. Their territory was limited to systems assigned to them by the Council. Their military forces were restricted to sizes deemed appropriate by Council standards. Kate Morrison, the security advisor and sister to Captain Jake Morrison, took over the presentation. Her dark hair was streaked with gray despite her relatively young age, a testament to the stress of her position. She displayed documents that human intelligence had gathered through monitoring Council communications and trading with independent species. The picture they painted was troubling. Junior species were required to provide resources to the Council at fixed prices well below market value. They had to contribute troops to Council military operations whether they agreed with those operations or not. Most disturbing was the cultural assimilation program. Kate showed examples of 3 species that had joined the Council as junior members centuries ago. Each one had been required to adopt Council standard language, government structure, and social customs. Within a few generations, their original cultures had been diluted or lost entirely. The Council called this process integration and presented it as a benefit, a way for primitive species to become civilized. Kate called it cultural genocide, and several delegates in the chamber nodded in agreement. The question before the Global Assembly was simple but profound. Should humanity accept council membership under these terms, or should they refuse and risk conflict with the most powerful political entity in the galaxy? Helen Foster opened the floor for debate, and representatives from around the world stood to voice their opinions. Some argued that humanity was too new to space travel to stand alone against civilizations millions of years old. Better to accept junior membership and work to change the system from within. Others countered that history had shown how difficult it was to regain freedom once surrendered. Every human culture had stories of occupation and the long, bloody struggles required to win back independence. Ambassador Carlos Rivera from South America spoke passionately about his own nation's history of colonization and the centuries it had taken to achieve true sovereignty. He argued that humanity should not willingly place themselves in the same position their ancestors had fought so hard to escape. Representative Yuki Tanaka from Japan reminded the Assembly that the current peace on Earth had only been possible because nations had agreed to respect each other's autonomy. The same principle should apply to humanity's relationship with alien civilizations. After 6 hours of debate, President Foster called for a vote. The question was direct. Should humanity accept Galactic Council membership as a junior species under the terms presented, or should humanity maintain complete independence? The voting took only minutes and the result was overwhelming. 183 nations voted for independence. Only 12 voted to accept Council membership, and 5 abstained. Humanity had made its choice. General Marcus Stone, the head of the Space Defense Force, received his orders immediately after the vote. He was a tall man with gray hair cut in a military style and a face that rarely showed emotion. His job was to protect humanity's interests in space, and now that job had become significantly more complicated. Marcus called together his senior staff in the war room beneath the Space Defense headquarters in Colorado. The holographic display showed every human colony, outpost, and ship currently operating beyond Earth. Colonel Nina Ross, one of the most experienced fighter pilots in the Defense Force, presented the current military situation. Humanity had 63 combat-capable ships scattered across their territory, ranging from small patrol craft to medium-sized frigates. Against the Council's thousands of vessels, it was barely enough for basic defense. However, Nina pointed out that the Battle of New Portland had revealed important information. Council ships were powerful but predictable. Their tactics had not changed in centuries because they had never needed to change. No one had ever fought back effectively before. Marcus authorized an immediate expansion of military production. Every shipyard in human space was to begin building defense platforms, fighters, and automated weapon systems. He also ordered the deployment of stealth reconnaissance drones throughout the border regions. If the Council was planning another attack, humanity needed advance warning. Lieutenant Commander Chris Palmer was assigned to coordinate the intelligence gathering operation, working with agents like Rachel Moore, who had experience operating in hostile territory. The meeting continued late into the night as strategies were developed and resources allocated. Marcus knew that humanity was playing a dangerous game. They were betting that their adaptability and willingness to fight would be enough to offset the Council's overwhelming technological and numerical advantages. It was not a comfortable position, but it was better than surrendering their freedom without resistance. Meanwhile, on the research vessel Discovery, Dr. Ellen Price sat in her small quarters staring at a message that had just arrived through an encrypted channel. The sender was Ambassador Zixthar himself, reaching out secretly without the knowledge of the Council. His message was brief but carried a tone of genuine confusion. He asked Ellen, as a scientist and someone who might understand the human perspective, to explain why her species was choosing conflict over cooperation. The Council was offering protection, technology, and stability. Why would humanity reject these benefits? Ellen composed her response carefully. She explained that humanity had learned hard lessons throughout its history. They had seen how power corrupted, how good intentions could mask exploitation, and how freedom once lost was nearly impossible to regain. Humanity was not rejecting cooperation. They were rejecting subordination. If the Council wanted a relationship with humanity, it would need to be a relationship between equals, not between master and servant. She sent the message and wondered if the ambassador would understand. Back on Earth, President Foster looked out the window of her office at the night sky. Somewhere up there, her species had just drawn a line and dared the galaxy to cross it. She thought about her daughter serving on a colony ship, her nephew training as a fighter pilot, and the billions of humans who were trusting her leadership. The weight of that responsibility felt heavier than ever. Helen had no illusions about the challenges ahead. The Council would not simply accept humanity's refusal and move on. There would be more confrontations, possibly even full-scale war. But as she stood there in the darkness, Helen remembered why they were taking this stand. Humanity had clawed its way up from tribalism to global unity, through countless struggles and sacrifices. They had finally learned to govern themselves with justice and respect for individual rights. To give that up for the promise of protection would betray everything their ancestors had fought for. Whatever happened next, humanity would face it as free people making their own choices, and that was worth any price. The council chamber had never been so chaotic in its 10,000-year history. High Chancellor Vormak tried to maintain order as representatives from 47 species all tried to speak at once. The crystalline being's voice resonated through the massive space, but even his authority was struggling to contain the panic that had gripped the assembly. News of humanity's formal rejection had arrived 3 days ago, and the council was fracturing under the weight of an unprecedented crisis. Ambassador Zixthar stood at his designated platform, watching the disorder with a sense of deep unease. He had spent decades as a diplomat, successfully integrating dozens of species into the council system. He had always believed that the council represented the best possible form of galactic governance, a structure that brought order and stability to the chaos of space. Now, for the first time, he was beginning to question those beliefs. The message from Dr. Ellen Price kept replaying in his mind, her words about freedom and self-determination challenging everything he thought he understood. Military strategist Quendra presented her latest analysis to the assembly, and the news was worse than anyone had anticipated. Human military capabilities were growing at an exponential rate. In just the 3 months since the Battle of New Portland, they had tripled their number of combat-ready vessels. More concerning was the tactical innovation humans displayed. Every engagement, even minor skirmishes with Council patrol ships, revealed new strategies and weapon systems. The humans learned from every encounter and adapted faster than any species in Council records. Councillor Fierus interrupted with economic data that painted an equally troubling picture. 17 independent colonies had formally requested trade agreements with humanity in the past month alone. These colonies, located in the disputed territories between Council space and the Outer Rim, had always been marginally loyal at best. The low taxes and favorable terms humans offered were proving irresistible. Even more alarming were the reports that 3 junior council member species had secretly sent delegations to human space to explore alternative arrangements. High Chancellor Vormak finally managed to restore order and called for formal proposals on how to address the human situation. The Velcron representative was the first to speak, his voice filled with barely controlled anger. He demanded total war against humanity. The insult of New Portland could not stand unpunished. If the Council allowed one species to defy their authority, others would follow. The Velcron proposed assembling the Grand Armada, a fleet so massive it had only been deployed twice in Council history, both times to eliminate existential threats to galactic stability. The Crystalline Collective offered a different approach. Instead of direct military action, they suggested an economic and technological blockade. Cut off human access to the rare materials needed for advanced space travel. Prevent them from acquiring new technology through trade or espionage. Isolate them until their expansion ground to a halt, and they were forced to negotiate from a position of weakness. Several council members nodded in agreement, seeing this as a more elegant solution than outright warfare. The Hive Consensus, speaking through their collective voice that echoed with the thoughts of billions of linked minds, proposed a third option. They suggested targeted strikes against human military installations combined with a propaganda campaign aimed at the human population. Show them the futility of resistance while promising generous terms for peaceful integration. Break their will to fight without having to destroy their entire civilization. It was the approach they had used successfully against numerous species throughout history. For 3 days, the Council debated. Arguments grew heated as old alliances fractured under the pressure of the crisis. Species that had cooperated for thousands of years found themselves on opposite sides of the fundamental question. How much force was acceptable to maintain council authority? Some argued that the council's power rested on the consent of its members, not on military might. Others countered that consent was meaningless if species could simply opt out whenever they disagreed with council decisions. On the fourth day, High Chancellor Vormak called for a vote. The measure was simple and terrifying in its implications. The council would authorize the assembly of the Grand Armada under the command of Admiral Kratok, who had requested a chance to redeem his failure at New Portland. The fleet would proceed to human space and present a final ultimatum: submit to council authority or face complete military destruction. The vote was closer than any in recent memory, but it passed. 112 delegates voted in favor, 93 voted against, and 47 abstained. Admiral Kratok received his orders with grim satisfaction. The shame of his defeat still burned in his mind, and he was determined to restore his honor. He began assembling the largest military force in galactic history. Over 3,000 warships were recalled from their posts across council space and directed to rendezvous at staging areas near the human border. The logistics alone were staggering, requiring the coordination of dozens of species, each with their own military traditions and command structures. Back on Earth, intelligence services detected the massive military buildup within days. Satellite arrays and deep space listening posts tracked the movement of council ships with growing alarm. General Marcus Stone stood in the war room surrounded by his command staff, staring at the tactical display that showed the approaching threat. The numbers were overwhelming. Even with the expanded human fleet, they were outnumbered more than 20 to 1. Every military simulation they ran ended in human defeat. Colonel Nina Ross refused to accept the simulations as final. She gathered a team of tactical specialists, including Major Chris Palmer and Captain Linda Cruz, to develop unconventional strategies. If they could not win through superior numbers or technology, they would need to win through deception and psychological warfare. Nina proposed a radical plan. Instead of trying to defend every colony, they would concentrate their forces at strategic choke points. Let the council fleet think they were winning, draw them deeper into human territory, and then hit them from unexpected angles. Lieutenant Commander Rachel Moore worked with the Intelligence Division to identify vulnerabilities in council fleet coordination. Her analysis revealed something interesting. The council had never fought a unified war against a single enemy. Their military experience consisted mainly of peacekeeping operations and suppressing small rebellions. The different species within the council had different communication protocols, command structures, and tactical doctrines. There was potential for confusion and friendly fire incidents if the human forces could create chaotic enough battlefield conditions. President Helen Foster addressed the human population from her office in Geneva. Her speech was broadcast across every human colony and settlement. She did not sugarcoat the situation. A massive alien fleet was approaching with the clear intention of forcing humanity into submission. The odds were against them, and many people would likely die in the coming conflict. But she reminded everyone why they were fighting. Freedom was not free, and it never had been. Every generation of humans had faced their own struggles against tyranny and oppression. This generation's struggle just happened to be against aliens instead of fellow humans. Helen spoke about the choice before them. They could surrender now and accept council rule, saving lives in the short term but condemning future generations to live as second-class citizens in their own galaxy. Or they could fight, knowing that even if they lost, they would have stood for something worth dying for. She reminded everyone that Earth's history was filled with examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through courage, creativity, and sheer determination. The American Revolution, the Winter War, countless other examples of underdogs who refused to give up. Dr. Ellen Price received another message from Ambassador Zixthar. This one was longer and more personal. The ambassador confessed that he was struggling with doubts about the council's decision. He had spent his entire life believing in the system he served. But watching the council prepare for war against a species that only wanted independence made him question everything. He asked Ellen if there was any way to avoid the coming bloodshed. Could humanity not see that resistance was futile and that submission would ultimately benefit them? Ellen's response was honest and direct. She told Zixthar that from humanity's perspective, the council's offer was not really an offer at all. It was a demand backed by the threat of violence. Yes, humanity might lose the coming war. Their ships might be destroyed, their colonies might be occupied, and their people might be forced to submit. But even in defeat, they would have demonstrated that there were species in the galaxy who valued freedom more than safety. That demonstration alone might inspire others to question whether the Council's ancient system was really as benevolent as it claimed to be. The Grand Armada completed its assembly at the designated staging area. Admiral Kratok stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the thousands of ships under his command. It was the most powerful military force ever assembled in galactic history. No species had ever withstood such overwhelming might. He recorded a message to be transmitted to all human settlements. The ultimatum was clear and non-negotiable. Humanity had 1 week to accept Council authority. All military forces were to stand down, all colonies were to accept Council administrators, and all human ships were to submit to Council inspection and registration. If humanity refused, the Grand Armada would begin systematic military operations against every human installation. Colonies would be occupied, ships would be captured or destroyed, and resistance would be met with overwhelming force. Admiral Kratok emphasized that the Council did not want to destroy humanity, only to bring them into the proper order of galactic civilization. But if destruction was necessary to maintain that order, the Council would not hesitate. The week passed like a countdown to the end of the world. Admiral Jake Morrison, recently promoted after his successful defense of multiple frontier colonies, stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the sensor displays with intense focus. The human fleet had assembled at the border of their territory, every available combat vessel positioned according to the strategy Colonel Nina Ross had developed. Jake's crew worked in tense silence, each person knowing that the next few hours would determine humanity's future in the galaxy. The Grand Armada appeared exactly on schedule, emerging from faster-than-light travel in a display meant to inspire terror and awe. 3,000 warships materialized in formation, their combined mass large enough to show up on gravitational sensors. The fleet stretched across space like a metal wall, each ship bearing the insignia of the Galactic Council. Admiral Kratok transmitted his final ultimatum, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Humanity had 1 hour to respond with unconditional surrender. President Helen Foster sat in the command center beneath Geneva, surrounded by military advisors and government officials from around the world. Every human settlement was watching and waiting for her response. Helen looked at the faces around her, seeing fear but also determination. She thought about her daughter, her grandchildren, and all the future generations of humans who would have to live with whatever decision she made in this moment. Then she gave the order that everyone knew was coming. Transmit humanity's final answer to the Council. The message that reached Admiral Kratok was not what he expected. Instead of a surrender or even a defiant declaration of resistance, it was a broadcast intended for every species in the galaxy. President Foster spoke directly to the camera, her voice calm and clear. She addressed not just the Council leadership, but the billions of beings living under Council rule. She talked about freedom and the right of every species to determine its own destiny. She explained that humanity was not fighting against peace or cooperation, but against domination disguised as protection. Helen described the terms the Council had offered, making sure that junior member species throughout the galaxy understood exactly what Council membership meant. No voting rights for centuries, restricted territory, mandatory military service, cultural assimilation programs, and economic exploitation. She asked a simple question that resonated across space. If the Council system was truly beneficial, why did it need to be enforced with the largest military fleet in history? Why could species not choose their own path and still maintain friendly relations with the Council? The broadcast was transmitted on every frequency, translated into every known language, and sent to every corner of galactic civilization. Council censors tried to block it, but human communications specialists like Lieutenant Kevin Shaw had designed the transmission to be nearly impossible to stop completely. The message reached Junior CUNY. SIL members, independent colonies, and even some senior Council species, whose populations had grown tired of the rigid hierarchy that governed their lives. Admiral Kratok ordered the attack to begin. The Grand Armada moved forward in perfect formation, a display of military precision that had been practiced for thousands of years. The human fleet appeared to retreat, falling back toward their core systems. Council ships pursued, confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage. This was the moment Nina Ross had planned for. The humans were not retreating in fear. They were drawing the enemy into a carefully prepared trap. As the Council fleet pushed deeper into human territory, they began to encounter unexpected resistance. Automated defense platforms that had been hidden in asteroid fields activated simultaneously. Minefields that had been invisible to Council sensors detonated as capital ships passed through them. Small human fighter squadrons led by pilots like Captain Linda Cruz appeared from nowhere, struck at vulnerable points in the Council formation, and disappeared before the aliens could respond effectively. The Grand Armada began to lose its perfect coordination. Different species within the fleet had different response protocols for ambush situations. The Velcrons wanted to maintain formation and push through. The crystalline collective ships began deploying defensive screens that interfered with the sensors of their own allies. The Hive consensus vessels tried to break off and pursue the human fighters individually. The result was exactly what Rachel Moore had predicted. Confusion and friendly fire incidents began to plague the massive fleet. On the bridge of the Endless Authority, Admiral Kraytok watched his carefully planned assault deteriorate into chaos. His communications channels were flooded with damage reports and requests for orders. 3 of his capital ships had been destroyed by what appeared to be simple kinetic weapons, projectiles moving so fast his shields could not stop them. Dozens more ships had been damaged by the unconventional tactics the humans employed. The species that had barely mastered space travel 3 years ago was somehow fighting his ancient military machine to a standstill. But the chaos in space was only part of what was happening. Throughout Council territory, something unprecedented was beginning. On the junior member world of Cerithia, protests erupted in the capital city. Cerithians who had heard President Foster's broadcast took to the streets demanding the same rights that humans were fighting for. Similar demonstrations began on other junior member worlds. The populations had always been told that Council membership was a privilege and an honor. Now they were questioning whether servitude could ever be called freedom. The Free Colonies of Andromeda, a loose confederation of independent settlements that had always maintained a cautious relationship with the Council, made a formal announcement. They declared complete independence from Council authority and offered mutual defense pacts to any species that wished to join them. The nomadic fleets, massive generation ships that traveled between stars and had always avoided permanent Council membership, sent a message of support to humanity. They pledged to share resources and technology with Earth and invited human diplomats to discuss cooperation between free peoples. 3 Junior Council members shocked the galaxy by formally withdrawing from the Council structure. The governments of these species announced that they would no longer accept Council authority over their internal affairs. They would maintain peaceful relations and honor existing trade agreements, but they would govern themselves according to their own values and traditions. The Council's authority, unchallenged for 10,000 years, was crumbling as species across the galaxy found the courage to demand their freedom. High Chancellor Vormak watched the reports coming in from across Council space with growing horror. The human conflict was supposed to be a simple military operation to restore order. Instead, it had become a spark that was setting the entire galactic political structure ablaze. Ambassador Zixthar stood beside him, and for once the veteran diplomat had no solutions to offer. Everything they had built over millennia was falling apart, because one stubborn species had refused to bend. Admiral Kraytok received an emergency transmission from Council headquarters. The message was brief and represented a complete reversal of policy. He was ordered to cease all offensive operations immediately and withdraw to neutral territory. The Council leadership wanted to negotiate with humanity, not as subjects seeking membership but as equals discussing terms of mutual coexistence. The admission of equality was something the Council had never offered to any species in its entire history. Jake Morrison received the withdrawal order from the Council fleet with cautious relief. His ships had fought brilliantly, but he knew they could not have held out much longer against such overwhelming numbers. The fact that the Council was retreating meant something fundamental had changed. He ordered his fleet to maintain defensive positions but to hold fire unless attacked. The battle was over, but the real work of building a new galactic order was just beginning. President Foster traveled to a neutral space station designated for the negotiations. She was accompanied by a small delegation including Paul Griffin, Kate Morrison, and surprisingly, Dr. Ellen Price. Ambassador Zixthar met them at the airlock, and for the first time, the alien diplomat looked genuinely uncertain. He admitted that he had spent his entire life believing in the council system, but watching humanity's stand had forced him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about governance and freedom. The negotiations lasted for weeks. The treaty that emerged was unlike anything in galactic history. Humanity would maintain complete independence and sovereignty over their territory. The Council would restructure itself, granting immediate full voting rights to all member species regardless of how long they had been members. Junior species would have the right to withdraw from the Council without penalty. The new agreement established boundaries based on mutual respect rather than hierarchical authority. Most importantly, the treaty included a provision that would change the galaxy forever. Any species, whether currently part of the Council or not, could join the new association as a full equal member from day one. There would be no junior memberships, no probationary periods, and no cultural assimilation requirements. Species would be free to maintain their own governments, militaries, and traditions while cooperating on matters of mutual interest like trade, scientific research, and defense against external threats. Captain Jake Morrison received new orders from Earth Command. The Frontier Explorer, along with dozens of other human exploration vessels, would be sent beyond Council space to make contact with emerging civilizations. Their mission was to offer something the galaxy had rarely seen: friendship without conditions, trade without exploitation, and an invitation to join the community of free peoples with no strings attached. Jake stood on his bridge with Lisa Hayes and Greg Palmer, looking at the star charts that showed vast regions of unexplored space, and felt a sense of excitement about the future. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through superior technology or ancient wisdom. They had changed it by standing firm on a principle so simple, it seemed obvious once stated clearly. No one had the right to rule another without consent. The age of galactic empires, where ancient civilizations dictated terms to younger species, was ending. The age of free peoples, where every civilization could choose its own path and cooperate as equals, was beginning. It would not be perfect, and there would certainly be challenges ahead, but it would be built on a foundation of respect and voluntary association, rather than fear and domination. As human ships ventured deeper into the unknown regions of space, they carried with them a message that would resonate with every species they encountered. Freedom was not something to be granted by those in power. It was a fundamental right that belonged to everyone, and when necessary, it was something worth fighting for no matter the odds.